Penn State's defense takes a massive hit. KJ Winston, the star safety, is going to be out what has been described as long term.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this live stream, but more importantly, be a part of the live comment section. I want to know your thoughts about this, as this is a bit of surprising news, and it's devastating news that KJ Winston is not going to be available for the foreseeable future. He is out long term, and we're going to discuss where Penn State's defense goes from here with Winston being out long term. So this is obviously not good news. This is not ideal news that Penn State is going to be losing a top 5 player on the team overall. Depending on your rankings, maybe even a top 3 player. This was somebody that was projected to go into the first round of next year's NFL draft. Somebody that has not missed a tackle in his collegiate career, is the best graded run defender according to Pro Football Focus. So there's a lot of things that Penn State is going to be missing here with KJ Winston not on the football field. He's a veteran, he's a playmaker, and he's a star playmaker. So it's not like Penn State is losing just a key role player here. This is significant that Winston is going to be out long term. And there's kind of a misunderstanding here as far as what long term means. James Franklin would tell us if he was going to be out for the season, guaranteed that this KJ Winston cannot return. But I feel like there's a lot that can be guessed about what long term means. Does that mean a month? 4 weeks? Okay, that seems like a best case scenario, because then Penn State gets into USC and Ohio State and Wisconsin and Washington, where they would really need him most. Or does that mean 6 to 8 weeks? Okay, so past the gauntlet, but he returns for that final portion of the season. And then the worst case scenario, which is, okay, he's not out for the season because he can return in time for a Big Ten championship, which of course, okay, better late than never, or the college football playoff, because you can't assume that Penn State's not going to finish its season there, that they are going to make the college football playoff. So long-term can mean a lot of things. The best case scenario is that he misses a few weeks. The not so ideal scenario is that he misses USC and potentially Wisconsin, Ohio State. That is a massive deal if he's not available for Ohio State. And then the worst case scenario is that he's not around until the end of the regular season, potentially a conference championship berth. But if he's not available, that makes it tougher to get there. And same thing with the college football playoff. Penn State is losing its top defender at this point. Abdul Carter's in that conversation once he figures out the defensive end position. Your top 2 players on defense are Abdul Carter and KJ Winston as far as star playmaking ability. KJ Winston 1A to this point because Abdul Carter has struggled with his move to defensive end. It's only been 2 games, and I firmly believe that Abdul Carter, his better days at defensive end are around the corner. However, right now at this point in time, going into Game 3 against Kent State, KJ Winston not being available for Penn State is that is your best player defensively. And what Penn State talked about, and we're also going to bring Zane Bransfield, associate producer, into the show to talk about this further on the live stream. Again, looking for your comments as well to go through this and talk about this. If Winston's not available, Penn State has to make some changes, big changes defensively. They are going to show more of a 4-3 defensive look from time to time, because right now you don't have a reliable safety option after KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, and Zach Wheatley. Dejon Lane, the true freshman, has been praised, has been talked about very highly True freshman, has only played on special teams. I think he has a couple of snaps, 2 or 3 snaps defensively, if that. Can you really rely on him immediately? He'll play against Kent State a lot. But Illinois is a different challenge. That could potentially be a top 25 matchup if they do in fact beat Nebraska this upcoming Friday. The defense, though, you are going to have to really rely on your veterans. So that's why I'm anticipating, and I've already talked about this earlier in the week, what happens if KJ Winston does miss time? Well, now we know that he's going to miss time. They're going to play 3 linebackers again. You have to. You can't just turn to a true freshman safety and say, okay, you're in, do the same things, do similar things that KJ Winston was doing. You're going to go back to a 3 linebacker rotation that's probably going to look like Tony Rojas as that will off-ball linebacker, Tyler Elsdon, Dom DeLuca as that strong side linebacker, and then Kobe King is your mic linebacker that's going to get the plays that's sent to his helmet, he has the microphone in his helmet to hear the play calls. Tyler Elsdon, because he's a veteran, will rotate in. We went to practice today, Wednesday, when this is airing live, and Tamir Robinson was back at practice. Dakari Nelson, if he's putting on the weight appropriately, could factor into some playing time very soon. But that is what Penn State's going to have to do. Now, they're never not going to run the 4-2-5. If Dejon Lane can get adjusted sooner rather than later, you can still anticipate those 3 safety looks. It's not going to be the same with KJ Winston. But KJ Winston, where he provided the most value with, aside from the veteran experience, playmaking ability, but what specifically about that playmaking ability? KJ Winston was the best run defender. You can check it. Pro Football Focus says that he is the best graded run defender on Penn State's defense. And then his tackling ability. So you really could consider KJ Winston as that 3rd linebacker. Sure, as a safety, you're going to be doing a lot more in coverage than your traditional linebacker, right? Compared to a Tyler Elsdon or a Dom DeLuca. But Tony Rojas has been really good in coverage. KJ Winston just offers more variety. He is better in pass coverage versus a DeLuca and Elsdon and even a Kobe King too. So that's the role that Winston plays, but he really is that additional linebacker. So we call it a 4-2-5 base defense with the 5 defensive backs because of the 3 safety look. But Winston was doing all of the roles of a traditional linebacker in this case. He just has the title of safety. So Penn State going back to a 4-3 is probably a welcome change for a lot of Penn State fans, but it's not a wholesale change where they scrap everything. It is really dependent on how soon can you get Dejon Lane ready to go at safety, at that safety position, and then what other options you have. Could Cam Miller factor into the Lion role, right? How is the safety rotation going to work? Because at the end of the day, linebacker depth had some concerns. But KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, and Zach Wheatley were really the glue holding the safety depth chart all together. Because if it wasn't for Dejon Lane being so ready as a true freshman that they said, yeah, he has the green light alongside Cooper Cousins and now Luke Reynolds. If it wasn't for Lane being way ahead of schedule, they'd be doomed. This would be a worst case scenario. But fortunately, Dejon Lane came in ready to play, even though he did enroll later. He enrolled in May as opposed to January, which James Franklin had talked about. He mentioned that it would have been more beneficial for the team and for Lane overall had he enrolled in January, but that's in the past. He's going to have to be ready to go now. Kent State is an opportunity to get valuable in-game playing experience, but you're not really going to have that reality check until you get into Big Ten conference play. And Illinois is not a pushover. I think that they're overrated currently in the top 25, but that doesn't mean that Penn State is going to absolutely wipe the floor with them. They're well coached. They have a returning quarterback in Luke Altmaier. They still do things well. I think they've lost some key pieces defensively, which is why Penn State, I think, will win in the end and will win by a comfortable amount. Again, I don't think it's a blowout in this case, but Penn State can wade the storm of Kent State, because that's not even a storm. That's nothing. I don't even know what that. They're the worst team in college football. They're a bottom 5 team. Illinois is going to present challenges, but Penn State overall is still better without KJ Winston. And then same thing with UCLA, and UCLA is way at the bottom of the Big Ten. It gets dicey when it gets to USC, when it gets to obviously Ohio State. Wisconsin lost its quarterback, but that's a road match in Camp Randall after you play at USC. That's back-to-back road games. It's how quickly, that's a lot of responsibility on a true freshman, but how quickly can he be ready? And I think the linebackers will be able to do enough. Again, that's not a bad trio. Tony Rojas, Kobe King, and Dom DeLuca. That's your starting three in a 4-3 traditional defense. Penn State isn't scrapping any game plan. This was something that they always had in their back pocket. Abdul Carter is going to stay at defensive end unless the linebacker depth happens to take a hit of its own. But that's not their plan, to move back Abdul Carter even with a big loss like this. So this is massive. You are losing your best defender at this point in time until Abdul Carter turns the corner at defensive end. That's just the fact of the matter here. And there's still plenty of more to discuss on this live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. So we'll be taking a look at your comments. We're going to talk to Zane Bransfield next, associate producer of the show, to talk about reevaluating Penn State's schedule. Are they going to finish 11-1 or 10-2, make the college football playoff? How big of a loss is KJ Winston to this Penn State defense? Truly, that's coming up next here after the break. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and that's because it is America's #1 sports book. But we have something a little bit different for you now through September 22nd, and that date is quickly approaching, so take advantage of this amazing deal. All FanDuel customers can bet just $5. $5 is all it takes, and you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account, current form payment, and you can cancel at any time. So there's no obligation. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, you can see that Penn State is a massive favorite against Kent State. Minus 48.5 on the spread. The total set at 55.5. There's no money line on this one because everyone knows that Penn State is going to win this game. But how much do you think they win this game by? If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And today's episode is also brought to you by Roy. Nittany Lion fans, have you heard about Roy? Roy stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fan, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal, and as you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. Roy changes the NIL game for fans. And I know what everybody's probably thinking here is that where do my contributions go? What happens if I make a contribution and a player makes a decision that doesn't go along with my school, my fan base? Well, there's the good news in that. No risk contributions. Roy has a safety plan in place where there are no risk contributions. So fans' contributions are securely held and are only distributed if the athlete makes the decision that aligns with the fan's support. If not, the money is returned to the fan. You can get the Roy app from the iOS App Store or Android and Google Play Store, and start making an impact on your favorite team. Use the referral code Locked On, that is Locked On, for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. And then visit joinroy.com. That's joinroy.com for more details. There's no purchase necessary and void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and get into the NIL game with Roy. And we will check back in on the comments briefly. Again, looking for your live comments. Kevin says, sad news about KJ. We are. This is a veteran player. This is a leader that everybody's looking to. He was potential first-round pick in the 2025 NFL draft. And a lot of it is the unknown. You just don't know when he is returning at this point. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but we don't know for sure. Kevin also adds, I know we are deep and talented, and he is a guy who is hard to replace. Fact, we are next man up mentality. Kevin, I like the attitude here. And let's bring in Zane Bransfield to talk about this injury a little further, associate producer to the show. All right, and we will welcome in Zane to the show to talk about what has happened with KJ Winston's undisclosed injury. We don't know the severity of it. We don't know what ultimately is the timeline, the timetable for this. But Zane, your first reaction to KJ Winston being out for a long-term period of time?
Well, obviously, first of all, you got to feel bad for KJ, just because that's tough as a young guy to get hurt like that. But, like, he's only a junior. He's got time ahead of him. So even if he does miss the rest of the season, you got to look at what's best for him long term. You don't want him to come back too soon and make it worse that he can't go play NFL ball or play senior year if that's what he ends up deciding. So you feel bad for him. You feel bad for the program, but you can find other people. Like if KJ, we don't know what his injury is. All we can hope for is the best for him.
I think this makes the games against USC and Ohio State that much more daunting. If he's not available, again, it's tough. I want to go into this with the idea that, hey, this is a worst case scenario, that he's going to miss somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 months. Hopefully, we can only speculate so much as far as it just kind of it. I want to anticipate that Penn State's not going to have him until they do. Okay. So if KJ Winston is unavailable, the games against USC and Ohio State become that much more difficult. But when it comes to Kent State, Illinois, Wisconsin, Washington, Purdue, Minnesota's interesting because you have to, if everybody else is available, that's still a very winnable game for Penn State. And then Maryland to finish up the season. All those games are very winnable games where Penn State is going to be the clear-cut favorite if KJ Winston's not on the sideline. When it comes to Ohio State, when it comes to USC, I think the conversation changes, not necessarily drastically, but Penn State was a 7-point favorite going into the USC game for preseason. I got to imagine that is if that might be even or flipped to where USC is a slight favorite.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That USC game becomes a whole lot harder without KJ. And it's 4 weeks away, and Ohio State's about 7 weeks away. So you have time for him to come back for Ohio State, but to say he's going to come back for that USC game is going to be pretty optimistic, considering it's long-term, and I would consider anything long-term as over 4 weeks. So I think you just have to look at what Penn State has, the next guy coming up. They have to find ways to adapt. James Franklin talked today after practice about how they have to be able to grow that depth at pretty much every position is what he always talks about. But this is a key spot here is finding that next safety or maybe a cornerback that they shift over in some scheme. They need to find somebody who can fill a KJ Winston sized hole on defense, which is a lot easier said than done, but it's not impossible, especially with the talent Penn State brings and a lot of their guys like DeJuan Lane. He's big like KJ is. He's about the same size. He's like 205.
From the same area. They're from the same area. They're both from Maryland, DC.
And he's a 4-star prospect. So it's not like he's just a walk-on like safety. Like he's a good player. Whether he can transform that in a game, that's another question. Like you said, he's going to get a lot of playing time against Kent State. And I think he's not going to be the only guy because they got to figure out what works and what doesn't. So I think Penn State plays a lot of different guys to fill that, maybe move Cam Miller over. And Jalen Reed, I think, is going to see a lot more time at safety this year, despite them wanting to play him at the Lion this year. But I think Penn State can figure it out and they have a lot of depth. And I don't doubt their ability to find depth because the safety, thankfully, isn't their weakest position on defense. I would say the linebackers are. So I'd rather have somebody be missing in the safety room than in the linebacker room if that's what we have to do.
That's so tough because I don't think Penn State. I think Penn State's in a bad case scenario. If it was somebody else, if this was Zach Wheatley or Jalen Reed, same thing with a Tony Rojas being unavailable or a Kobe King. That's the kind of impact that all those players have. Now that is also a good thing that Penn State has all those players that have that star power on defense and can disrupt offensive game plans. KJ Winston is the best overall defender. Great against the run. So Penn State's run defense might take a step backwards in this case. Dom DeLuca is not bad against the run. If they go back to that 4-3, which I am fully anticipating here, you can play Tony Rojas, Kobe King, and Dom DeLuca and still have a top 10 run defense. Where it gets tricky is the pass defense. So USC and Ohio State in particular, I think a 4-3, regardless if KJ Winston was going to be available for the Illinois game or not, a 4-3 defense would have been the smarter base, would have been the more intelligent game plan to go up against a team like Illinois, because they're probably going to run some more power stuff, even though they have transitioned to a spread offense with Luke Altmaier quarterback and he offers that dual threat ability. Illinois doesn't strike me as that, that heavy passing offense. They're going to be a heavy run offense, and that's Brett Bielema at his core. But they do have a spread offense with elements. Again, they like to run the ball and control the pace of the game. But USC and Ohio State, those teams really like to push the pace. They're going to go 3 wide receiver. They're going to go 4 wide receiver. You need your 4 best defensive backs, period. 5 best defensive backs, because Tony Rojas, I wouldn't ask him to cover a slot wide receiver. I wouldn't ask Kobe King or Dom DeLuca to do that. What I would ask is that you put your 5 best defensive backs on the field when USC puts its 5 best wide receivers. Same thing with Ohio State. They could do the same thing, and we've seen how good that talent is. That is first and second round talent up and down their first 3 starters. Their first 3 starters all have day 1, day 2 draft potential at Ohio State. And that's where KJ Winston really makes the difference. As stout as he is in run defense and makes that run defense that much better, Penn State's biggest issue was not going to be defending the run because they have other players that can do that. It's the fact that when you get to Ohio State and USC that have these high-flying offenses, how do you defend that when your best overall defensive back is out?
And I totally agree. That definitely makes a challenge for Penn State. You got to find that, because especially a guy like KJ, you can put him one-on-one with somebody and he can usually do that. Now you got to find other guys to pick up that slack. And although I think Penn State has a lot of deep possibilities, it's definitely a hole, but they've dealt with major injuries before to top players. And I think if any school is going to have an injury to a top player, I think Penn State's one of the best at overcoming that injury. Especially, it's not like KJ's not around. A few of the players said today that he's still Drew Shelton even said, he's like, I didn't even know he was hurt because he's been all around the team. He's been he's like a captain. He's all with the players. And I think that makes a big difference, because even if he's not on the field, he can, if it's like DeJuan Lane out there, he can kind of coach him a little bit and kind of give him some tips on what to do if he sees something that maybe the coaches aren't seeing.
Right.
And so I think Penn State's going to be okay. Obviously you'd love to have KJ out there, but the reality of it is he's not there. Other people need to step up, and Penn State needs to find other ways to win. And obviously the defense did not look good 2 weeks ago against Bowling Green. So I think there's a lot of things that need to change. And obviously that's not just a one guy problem, especially when KJ Winston didn't play the whole second half of the game. So I think there's a lot of things that Penn State needs to do on defense, and they're going to have to figure it out, whether that's linebacker, safety, cornerback. A lot of things that coaches see, that we don't notice. And I think they know about all those things they need to work on, especially now having this bye week before Kent State. And Kent State almost is like a scrimmage anyway. So you get kind of 2 weeks to just work out a whole bunch of stuff before you start playing some higher level talent, especially when you need to prepare for Illinois, who I do think is a good team. And I think will definitely push them to the limit, especially with Luke Altmaier, who Penn State doesn't do well against dual threat quarterbacks, and I think he's one of the better ones in the nation.
Okay.
And I think he'll put him to the test. So I think Penn State needs to work out their kinks on defense. And like I said, it's not just a one guy problem. So losing KJ, it hurts, but he's not the only reason they gave up almost 30 points or whatever it was to Bowling Green. So I think the Penn State defense can be better. We said after West Virginia, we thought they were better than last year. I don't know if they're better than last year, but they can get better. And that happens week in and week out. That's college football goes. You can be the top one week and down the next. You look at Georgia, what happened to them last week. They almost lost to Kentucky. So I think Penn State is in a good spot considering all things. And I think they can get better and still finish this season definitely 11-1, 10-2, and make the playoffs and win, whether it's with KJ or without KJ, because this defense, they have the talent. It's whether they can execute, and they got to figure that out for themselves.
A bunch of excellent points, Zane. That is Zane Bransfield over on the other side. His links to his work in social media platforms will be down in the description. Zane, thanks for the time to join me on this live episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate it. And still more to come on this episode, talking about which other players are going to be available. So it's not just about Dejon Lane. James Franklin brought up some other players that are going to be factored into the rotation and where Penn State's defense will rely on now that KJ Winston is unavailable for the foreseeable future. And we'll discuss more of that on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime has just released a new feature called Gametime Picks, and it helps make getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than before. Gametime Picks helps you filter out all of the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I have Gametime pulled up right now to tell you about the tickets that are available on Gametime for Penn State. And let's look ahead to Illinois. That's a prime time game. What tickets are available there? Well, already immediately sorted by the top deals. You could get 2 tickets on the home side of the stadium, so behind Penn State's sideline, for $162 a piece. That's all in pricing. The fees are factored in up front, so there's no second guessing. And then you have other deals that include the cheapest tickets that you can get for that primetime game against Illinois in the South Upper Deck end zone, $60 a piece. That is over at Gametime. Just take the guesswork out of buying tickets. And how you do that is by choosing Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And today's episode is also brought to you by Team Ticker. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign for college sports fans. If you're watching this live show, that sign right there behind me to my left is a Team Ticker sign. Whether it's football, men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball, soccer, or softball, Team Ticker has you covered. It's a combination of a design and function that gives you an entertaining, creative way to display your team pride while providing a unique connection to your favorite team. You'll never miss a game again, as the high-tech retro display provides a countdown to the next big game, as well as daily updates on the latest team news, stats, schedule standings, and so much more. Team Ticker is the ultimate addition to your Nittany Lions sports collection, and once you hang it on the wall, it's going to be the talk of all your fellow Penn State fans. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign. Go to teamticker.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to receive $50 off your Team Ticker purchase. That's right, $50 off when you use promo code LOCKEDON over at teamticker.com. And we'll finish up the show by discussing what Penn State can do going forward now with its available players. So Penn State, they are in a very tough situation with KJ Winston being unavailable for what could be, again, a best case scenario. Long term means a lot of things to me. Long-term could mean 4 weeks, 1 month, 6 to 8 weeks, 2 months, and then kind of the most ideal situation, the least ideal situation is him being out over 8 weeks, 10, 11 weeks, to the point where it's outside of the regular season, but technically he can come back for a playoff game. Long-term can mean a lot of things. Andrew Rapplier is dealing with a long-term injury as well, and we don't know how long he is going to be out, other than he's going to miss an extended period of time. That's what long-term means to me. I feel like James Franklin would say KJ Winston is out for the season if KJ Winston was in fact out for the season. So there is a chance that he can return. It's just a matter of when, and we don't know the injury, so we can't even have a good idea of good understanding of what Penn State and what KJ Winston is dealing with so that he can recover from this ultimately. Check in on the comments again. Kevin added, God, let's hope not, 6 to 8 weeks. Kevin, it might be worse. I'm not entirely certain here. And Kevin also added, it's good to hear that T. Robinson, that's Tamir Robinson, is back at practice. Hopefully Wiley can get healthy soon as well. We are. That would help if KJ Winston's going to miss time, that Penn State can get some other players back from injury. Tamir Robinson is one of them. He was looked to be a full participant at practice. Keon Wiley, who Kevin is referring to. Keon Wiley is one of the linebackers that I thought could have had a breakout season, especially with Abdul Carter moving to that defensive end spot. Keon Wiley was backing up Abdul Carter. You have Tony Rojas there, but the more the merrier. The more you have, Keon Wiley looked good in that Rose Bowl game, showed a breakout possibility, and then the injury, and it's like, man, this is, that's devastating. But in the same case, he's not designated to be out for the season. There's optimism that he can return this season. And the same thing with Zariah Fisher. Zariah Fisher dealing with what hasn't been described as a long-term injury, but he is not out for the season either. All three of those guys can come back in a timely manner. Penn State's defense could be humming along when it matters most at the end of the season going into playoff time. But the players that need to step up in the meantime, I talked about how Penn State and Tom Allen can run a 4-3 defense. They absolutely should, and they absolutely will. You have Tony Rojas, you have Kobe King, and you have Dom DeLuca. Tyler Elston can factor in. Tamir Robinson looks, again, full participant at practice, is one of those 5 trustable linebackers. Dakari Nelson just needs to add the weight. Maybe Keon Wiley can come back sooner rather than later. You have true freshmen Kari Jackson and Anthony Specca that offer some upside as well. I think they're kind of in the same boat as Dejon Lane, that if the opportunity presents itself, they would need to go in and contribute significant playing time. But Dejon Lane becomes the top name to replace what KJ Winston was offering, since they're at the same position. But Lane had the green light. They were going to burn his red shirt all along. They knew that since the beginning of the season, and his time is now. James Franklin had mentioned a fellow true freshman, Antoine Belgrave Shorter, getting some looks at safety as well. I think Franklin would have mentioned Dakari Nelson going back to safety if they felt that was what was needed. But Nelson has moved. I think Nelson is fully transitioning to the linebacker spot. I feel like Nelson would have been talked about as a potential adjustment back to safety if they needed him. There's Lamont Payne as well. He is in the safety room. Tyrese Mills has bounced back and forth between linebacker and safety, but it's really Dejon Lane and Antoine Belgrave Shorter who have been announced as just that. Cam Miller could play the lion position as well, and then you have Jalen Reed and Zach Wheatley still play those other 2 safety spots. Why the 4-2-5 is unique is because KJ Winston's playing strong safety, Zach Wheatley's playing free safety, and then Jalen Reed is playing that lion position, that hybrid linebacker safety, even though KJ Winston was essentially that third linebacker. They all were. The way that they play the run, Jalen Reed has gotten so much better from last season to this season. He looks like an NFL caliber type of player, an NFL caliber safety, because that's what he will be drafted as, even though he's great against the run. He is not afraid to go into the pile and make a tackle. He looks like he's flying everywhere. He looks like he's playing at a different speed this year. So it is good that Penn State has other veteran safeties. It wasn't just all about KJ Winston, and then the safety room was basically hinging on the availability of Winston. That's not the case. Jalen Reed is still there. Zach Wheatley is still there. There's a lot of promise for a guy like Dejon Lane. Antoine Belgrave Shorter was mentioned unprovoked by James Franklin, so I have optimism there. The true freshman cornerback who's going to get some looks at safety. You can move Cam Miller into the slot and have him be that co-player. I won't call him a co-starter at the Lions spot. That's still Jalen Reed's until further notice. But Penn State can still do things. They're just going to run more of a hybrid defensive look between the 4-3 and the 4-2-5, depending on personnel. You go up against a Minnesota, you better be running a 4-3. You go up against a USC or an Ohio State, run a 4-2-5. It makes sense with what is available to you. I think Kevin brings up a good point here as I still have the comments section up. This is where the King Mack transfer hurts. Literally. Yeah, it does. That was something that was brought up immediately. Is King Mack transferring to Alabama? Penn State could have used him now more than ever, because I think Lane right now in 2024 had a similar timeline to what Mack did in 2023, but Mack wasn't going to start. It was Winston, Reed, and Wheatley. And I don't know what that conversation was with Alabama. Was it the promise, the guarantee of a starting spot, more NIL, whatever it was, it got him to commit to the Alabama Crimson Tide after he entered the transfer portal. So whatever Penn State's pitch was to keep him in Happy Valley was not better than what Alabama had said when they had their recruiting conversations. But King Mack, I think, would have been he would have had a great season. I don't know what the differentiator was between, if he really wanted to be a starter and play that much more, so be it. But I feel like because of the talent, because of what you need in defensive back, and he didn't have to be just a safety. He could have played the slot cornerback. He was recruited as just a defensive back, even though he was a safety. But King Mack losing that depth absolutely hurts. It absolutely hurts. And that's where we'll finish this episode, a live episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Kevin, thank you for contributing to the conversation. I also appreciate everybody that joined this show to check it out live. The news is not good. KJ Winston is out with a long-term injury. We'll see when he is going to be available at any point this time this season, but for the foreseeable future, he will be out, and Penn State's defense has to adjust. I had them at 10-2. I still have them at 10-2. I think they are better than everybody else without KJ Winston. Ohio State and USC. USC being on the road. If that was in Beaver Stadium, different story. Without KJ Winston, I'm going to have to say that USC has a better chance of winning that game, given what Winston was able to offer defensively. Again, thank you so much for checking out this live episode, everyone. Please leave a like on it, but more importantly, after this episode is over, be a part of the comments section. You can still share your thoughts about KJ Winston and what you expect from the Penn State defense, and if you need to reevaluate their record. Do you think they'll go 10-2? Can they still beat USC without KJ Winston? Let me know down in the comments section, and if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.